Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter's Stories. My beautiful family member, stop for a moment and take a deep breath. You are alive, you are here, and you are a gift to this world. Look in the mirror. What do you see? A strong, beautiful, and unstoppable soul. No matter what yesterday looked like, today is a fresh start. You are worthy of love, happiness, and success. Never let doubts dim your light because you were created for greatness. Smile, my dear family member, because you are loved. Choose joy, choose peace, and above all, choose to believe in yourself. Life is precious, and you only get one, so live it boldly, love fearlessly, and never forget that you matter. Today, I just want to take a moment to appreciate each and every one of you. You are not just viewers, you are my family. No matter where you are in the world, know that you are seen, you are valued, and you are deeply loved. Let's begin with a heartfelt prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you today with open hearts, grateful for the love that connects us as a family. Thank you for every person here. Each one is special, each one is precious. Lord, I ask that you bless them abundantly, wipe away their tears, lift their burdens, and fill their hearts with peace. Strengthen those who feel weak, comfort those who are hurting, and remind them that no matter what they are going through, they are never alone. Surround them with love, joy, and unshakable faith. May this moment together bring light into every soul. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Now, my dear family, I would love to know where each of you is joining from. Are you watching from the United States, home of the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Barack Obama, and Michelle Obama? The United Kingdom, where legends like Princess Diana and David Beckham or Sir Lewis Hamilton? South Africa, the land of the iconic Nelson Mandela and Trevor Noah? Canada, where global icons like Celine Dion and Wayne Gretzky come from? Australia, home of the legendary Steve Irwin and Kathy Freeman? The beautiful Caribbean islands, where we celebrate inspiring figures like Jamaica, Usain Bolt and Bob Marley, Trinidad and Tobago, CLR James and Nicki Minaj, Barbados, Rihanna and Sir Garfield Sobers, the Bahamas, Sir Lyndon Pindling and Debbie Ferguson Mackenzie, Dominica, Roosevelt Skerritt and Jason Clouden St. Lucia, Sir Derek Walcott and Joseph Marcel Granada, Karani James and Eric Gary. Or perhaps you're tuning in from another beautiful country. Let me know in the comments below. I also want to hear your thoughts on our last two stories. Did they touch your hearts? Which parts made you smile? Your feedback means the world to me and helps me create even more heartfelt stories for you. Let's take attendance today. Comment present below so I know you're here with us on this beautiful day. Remember, my dear family, you are what makes this community special. Your presence, your love, and your support brings so much joy to our storytelling family. With all my love and blessings, Mr. Peter, drop your comments below and let's connect. The amber liquid in Langston Truman's crystal tumbler caught the light as he swirled it methodically, his steel-grey eyes fixed on the Manhattan skyline. 40 floors above the city, he stood like a colossus, untouchable, unbreakable. His empire stretched across continents, his name whispered with equal parts fear and reverence in boardrooms from Tokyo to London. Mr. Truman. His assistant's voice barely penetrated his thoughts. They're waiting. Langston didn't turn. Let them wait. Power was measured in the moments others spent anticipating your arrival. At 42, Langston had mastered that lesson better than his Harvard professors could have dreamed. His fingers brushed against the platinum watch on his wrist, a reminder of time's value and his dominion over it. Your father's attorneys have been waiting 45 minutes, Jax pressed, his voice careful but insistent. A muscle twitched in Langston's jaw. My father is dead. And yet his will continues to dictate your future. The truth in those words burned more than the scotch sliding down Langston's throat. He drained the glass and set it down with deliberate control, though what he wanted was to shatter it against the wall. Very well. He adjusted his Tom Ford suit jacket midnight blue, custom-tailored to accentuate the physique he maintained with ruthless discipline. "Let's hear what chains the old tyrant forged for me from beyond the grave." The conference room fell silent as he entered. 7 men and 2 women, legal predators all, rose from Italian leather chairs. Their collective net worth might impress others, but to Langston, they were merely messengers. Mr. Truman, Gregory Blackwell, his father's personal attorney for 3 decades, extended his hand. "Thank you for joining us." Langston ignored the pleasantry, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Spare me the performance, Gregory. What financial gymnastics has my father orchestrated this time?" Blackwell cleared his throat, retrieving a document from his briefcase. "As you know, Harrison Truman's final amendment to his will contained certain conditions regarding your inheritance." Conditions. Langston's voice was winter itself. A curious word for blackmail. "The remaining 40% of Truman Global's voting shares will pass to you, but only upon fulfillment of a specific requirement." Blackwell paused, his eyes dropping to the document rather than meeting Langston's gaze. "Marriage within 6 months of today's date." A glacial silence descended upon the room. Langston's expression remained unchanged, though beneath the table his right hand curled into a fist. "I see my father's sense of humor remains intact, despite his decomposition." The words were delivered with surgical precision. "And is there a specific bride he selected from the grave, or am I permitted that small freedom?" Blackwell shifted uncomfortably. "There is, in fact, a stipulation regarding the bride." Of course there was. Harrison Truman had orchestrated every detail of Langston's life, his education, his career path, even his romantic entanglements. Why would death change that pattern? Della Miles. The name hung in the air, unfamiliar, yet carrying the weight of inevitability. Winston Miles's daughter. Langston arched an eyebrow. The telecommunications magnate. Yes. The merger would position Truman Global to dominate the emerging quantum communications sector. Your father and Winston Miles had discussed this arrangement before his passing. Langston's laugh held no warmth. "How perfectly medieval. And what does Ms. Miles think of being bartered like 16th century chattel?" A new voice entered the conversation, feminine, confident, with an edge that commanded attention. "Ms. Miles thinks your father was a calculating bastard, but at least he understood business." Langston turned, his practiced indifference faltering for a millisecond. She stood in the doorway like a vision from another world, tall, with skin the color of burnished mahogany, her curves accentuated by a white power suit that should have looked corporate, but somehow channeled sensuality instead. Her hair formed a crown of intricate braids, and her eyes, dark, intelligent, and utterly unimpressed, met his without hesitation. Della Miles. She crossed the room with the grace of a panther, extending a hand tipped with deep red nails. "I assume you're the reluctant groom." Langston rose, taking her hand not in a shake but turning it slightly, an almost antiquated gesture that stopped short of a kiss. "Langston Truman, apparently we're being sold to each other. My condolences." Her smile was razor-sharp. "Save them. I'm here because my father's medical care costs 7 figures annually, and this arrangement guarantees Miles Communications remains under family control." She reclaimed her hand. "I assume you have similar practical motivations." 40% of Truman Global would be difficult to replace. He gestured to the empty chair beside his. "Shall we discuss the terms of our mutual imprisonment?" As she took the seat, a subtle scent enveloped him, not the cloying perfume he was accustomed to from the women in his circle, but something earthier with notes of jasmine and amber. It was distracting. Blackwell resumed, outlining the marriage requirements. Minimum duration of 3 years, public appearances together at key events, establishment of a shared residence. And of course, he added with visible discomfort, the expectation of an heir within the first 2 years. Della's laugh was unexpected, rich and genuine, with a musicality that seemed out of place in the sterile conference room. Of course, nothing solidifies a business transaction like a baby. Langston studied her profile. Her composure was remarkable considering the circumstances. Most women would be either furious or calculating their share of his fortune. She seemed merely amused by the absurdity. "I have additional terms," Langston stated, drawing attention back to himself. "A prenuptial agreement protecting both our interests, separate bedrooms in our shared residence, public unity but private autonomy." "Agreed," Della responded without hesitation. "I also require continued leadership of Miles Communications' African Expansion Initiative and 2 weeks monthly in Lagos to oversee operations." 1 week monthly, Langston countered automatically, with video conferencing for the remainder. Her eyes narrowed slightly. 10 days with your jet at my disposal. Done. The attorneys exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this efficient negotiation. "There's one more thing," Della added, her tone shifting subtly. "While I understand this is a business arrangement, I expect fidelity during its duration. I won't be humiliated by tabloid photos of my husband with other women." The request surprised him. "Agreed, provided the expectation is mutual." "Of course." Something flashed in her eyes, a challenge or perhaps amusement. "Though I'm curious, will that requirement prove difficult for the infamous Langston Truman? Your reputation with women precedes you, as does yours." The words escaped before he could censor them. Her expression cooled immediately. "Meaning?" Langston maintained eye contact. Harvard Business School, Rhodes Scholar, turned down partnership at Goldman Sachs to build your father's company in emerging markets. Your professional reputation, Ms. Miles. What else would I be referring to? The tension between them crackled with unspoken currents. Della's posture relaxed marginally, but her eyes remained wary. "Then we understand each other." She turned to Blackwell. "Draft the agreements. We'll review them separately with our attorneys." "And the wedding?" Blackwell inquired. 6 weeks, Langston decided. "Sufficient time for preparations without unnecessary delay. Small ceremony, large reception, the appropriate spectacle for the business pages." Della nodded once. "Acceptable." As the meeting concluded and the attorneys filed out, Langston found himself alone with his bride-to-be. In the sudden quiet, the artificial nature of their arrangement seemed more pronounced. "Drink?" he offered, moving toward the bar cart. "Macallan 18, neat." He poured 2 glasses, impressed, despite himself, by her choice. "To successful negotiations." She accepted the glass, but didn't drink immediately. "Tell me something, Langston. Does anything about this situation bother you? Being manipulated from the grave? Having your personal life dictated by corporate interests?" Langston considered the question seriously. "Freedom is largely an illusion, especially for people in our position. I've always known my life would be shaped by Truman Global's needs." "That's not an answer." "No, it's not." He sipped his scotch. "What about you? Sacrificing yourself for your father's company seems rather biblical." A shadow crossed her features. "My father sacrificed everything for me when my mother died. He deserves this loyalty in return." She paused. "Besides, it's only 3 years." 3 years is a significant commitment. I've endured worse." She finished her drink in one elegant swallow and set down the glass. "I have a flight to catch. My assistant will coordinate with yours regarding the details." As she turned to leave, Langston found himself speaking again. "Have dinner with me tonight." She paused, turning back with a questioning look. If we're to convince the world of this union, we should at least know each other beyond resumes and reputation. My jet can take you to Lagos tomorrow instead." Della studied him with those penetrating eyes. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Truman?" "Dinner? Conversation, nothing more." After a moment's consideration, she nodded. 7 o'clock. Send your car." When she left, Langston remained motionless, processing the unexpected developments of the morning. Marriage had never been in his plans, not after witnessing his parents' elegant but emotionless union. His father had treated his mother as another acquisition, appreciating her beauty and social connections, but never her essence. Now he was poised to repeat that pattern, albeit with a woman far more formidable than his soft-spoken mother had been. His phone vibrated with a text from Jax. "Background file on Della Miles in your secure email." Langston stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the notification. Standard procedure when entering any business arrangement was thorough research on all parties involved. This marriage was, at its core, a business transaction. Yet something held him back, a reluctance he couldn't immediately identify. Before he could analyze the feeling, another text appeared. Rumors from Princeton undergrad days might affect marriage validity clause. Langston's thumb tapped the notification, curiosity and pragmatism overriding his momentary hesitation. Whatever romantic notions might have flickered briefly were extinguished by reality's cold breath. This was business, and in business, information was power. As the secure file opened, Langston's expression hardened. The dossier contained not just professional accomplishments, but personal details, including whispers about Della's college relationship with a visiting professor, rumors of an affair with a married ambassador during her time in South Africa. The sources were questionable, the evidence circumstantial, but in Langston's experience, such rumors rarely materialized from nothing. He closed the file, a new calculation forming in his mind. His father's will had been specific. The marriage must be genuine in all aspects. Any evidence of deception would invalidate the inheritance. The question now was whether Della Miles was as authentic as she appeared, or if she harbored secrets that could jeopardize everything. As night fell over Manhattan, Langston adjusted his tie and prepared to discover exactly who his future wife really was. Behind the confidence, behind the sharp intellect, behind those eyes that revealed nothing while seeing everything. By morning, he would know the truth. And truth, in Langston Truman's experience, was the most dangerous weapon of all. Chapter 2. The Wedding. Moonlight spilled across Langston's penthouse as he studied Della's dossier for the third time. 6 weeks had passed since their first meeting, arrangements made, appearances choreographed, a narrative crafted for public consumption. The story of their whirlwind romance had been strategically fed to the press. A chance meeting at a charity gala, mutual ambition blossoming into unexpected passion, a proposal beneath the northern lights during a business trip to Oslo. All fiction, meticulously constructed, yet their dinner that first night had been unexpectedly genuine. Della's wit matched his own, her knowledge of global markets impressive. They'd spoken for hours about everything except their impending marriage. Since then, their interactions had been limited to brief meetings with wedding planners and publicists, professional, distant, as if that evening's connection had been imagined. The rumors, however, lingered in his mind. Langston prided himself on rational thinking, but something primitive colored his thoughts when he considered Della's past. The dossier offered nothing concrete, merely whispers about a relationship with a visiting professor at Princeton, implications about Ambassador Kingsley during her time in South Africa. His phone chimed. A message from Bryson Westwood, Harvard classmate and notorious gossip. Heard your bride knew Ambassador Kingsley quite well during her South African stint. Very well. Congratulations on the wedding, old friend. Langston's jaw tightened. Tomorrow he would marry a woman he barely knew, tying his fortune and legacy to her reputation. He needed certainty. St. Patrick's Cathedral loomed against the Manhattan skyline, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven. Inside, 500 of the world's elite waited, checkbooks and influence making up for genuine connection to the couple. In a private chamber, Della stood before a mirror, resplendent in a custom Vera Wang creation, an architectural marvel of silk and lace that transformed her from executive to ethereal vision. "You look like a goddess," murmured Phoenix, her best friend since childhood, adjusting the cathedral-length veil. Della's reflection showed confidence, but her eyes held something deeper, calculation perhaps, or resignation. "I look like a billion-dollar merger." "Then it's the most stunning merger Manhattan has ever seen." Phoenix squeezed her hand. "Are you sure about this, Dell?" 3 years is a long time to pretend." "I'm not pretending. This is business." Della turned, the dress whispering against the floor. "Langston and I understand each other perfectly." Phoenix's expression remained doubtful. "The man has a reputation for business brilliance, and for coldness, for discarding people when they've served their purpose." Della's smile tightened. "Then we're perfectly matched." A knock interrupted them. Winston Miles entered, regal despite the oxygen tube tethering him to the portable tank. Cancer had ravaged his once powerful frame, but his eyes remained sharp. "My legacy," he said simply, voice raspy from treatments. Della embraced him carefully, mindful of his fragility. "I won't let you down, Daddy. This isn't just about me or the company." He pulled back, studying her face. "Harrison Truman was a shark in business, but an iceberg at home. His son is cut from the same cloth." "I can handle Langston Truman." Winston's expression softened. "I know, but can your heart?" Della's entrance silenced the cathedral. Langston, waiting at the altar, felt his breath catch. An involuntary reaction to her ethereal beauty, she moved toward him with queen-like grace, her father at her side moving slowly but proudly. When Winston placed Della's hand in his, Langston felt an unexpected weight to the gesture, ancient, symbolic, a transfer of protection and responsibility that transcended their modern arrangement. The ceremony proceeded with flawless precision. They exchanged rings and vows written by publicists, promising love and fidelity with voices that carried conviction, if not truth. When the bishop pronounced them husband and wife, Langston cupped Della's face with surprising gentleness. Their kiss lasted precisely long enough to seem passionate without crossing into impropriety. "You're an excellent actor," Della whispered against his lips. "As are you, Mrs. Truman," he returned, offering his arm. The reception at the Metropolitan Club transformed centuries of tradition into modern opulence. Crystal chandeliers illuminated tables laden with white orchids and black calla lilies. A string quartet played as guests consumed Michelin-starred cuisine and vintage champagne. As they moved through obligatory dances and conversations, Langston kept Della close, his hand resting possessively against the small of her back. To observers, the gesture seemed romantic, a husband unable to break physical contact with his bride. Only Della felt the tension in his fingers, the subtle control in his touch. "You're rather convincing," she murmured during their first dance, bodies moving in perfect rhythm despite having never practiced. "I've always excelled at persuasion." His eyes tracked over her face, searching. "Tell me, Della, has anyone ever truly known you, beyond the accomplished facade?" The question caught her off guard. "That's rather philosophical for a wedding reception." "Consider it curiosity about my new wife." She matched his gaze without flinching. "Has anyone ever truly known you, Langston?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Touché." From across the room, Langston observed her, the way she commanded attention without seeking it, how her smile transformed from professional to genuine when speaking with her father. "She's magnificent," remarked Alexandra Harrington, his father's oldest friend. "Harrison would be pleased." "My father's pleasure was never my priority," Langston replied, sipping champagne. Alexandra studied him over her glasses. "Perhaps it should have been. He orchestrated this match for you, not against you." "And what makes you say that?" "Because Della Miles is the only woman I've ever met who might be your equal. Strong enough to withstand you, brilliant enough to challenge you." She patted his arm. "Harrison knew you needed that, even if you don't." Later, their limousine glided through Manhattan streets toward Langston's, now their, penthouse at 157. Silence stretched between them until Della spoke. "The press got what they needed. Tomorrow's headlines will cement our union for the business world." "Indeed." Langston loosened his bow tie, studying her. "Your father seemed to enjoy himself." "He did. Thank you for the medical suite arrangements. Having his doctors nearby made the day possible for him. He's important to you." It wasn't a question, but Della answered anyway. "He's my world. After my mother died, he rebuilt our lives around me. This marriage secures his legacy. It's worth whatever price I pay." Something in her tone made Langston pause. "And what price do you anticipate exactly?" Her eyes met his, unflinching. 3 years of my freedom, manageable considering the return on investment." The elevator opened directly into a marble foyer. As they entered, Della's eyes widened slightly at the space. Minimalist, masculine, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering city. "Your quarters are through there," Langston indicated a hallway, "redecorated to the specifications your assistant provided. Mine are in the opposite wing." "Efficient." Della slipped off her heels, instantly losing 3 inches of height. "I'll have my remaining things moved in tomorrow." "Your father's medical team is established in the guest apartment downstairs. They'll report directly to you regarding his condition." The thoughtfulness of this arrangement clearly surprised her. "Thank you." An awkward silence settled between them. Strange intimacy between strangers now legally bound. "Would you like a drink?" Langston moved toward the bar, removing his jacket. "Yes." He poured 2 glasses of bourbon, handing one to her. Their fingers brushed, an innocent contact that somehow felt charged with significance. Della moved to the window, silhouette elegant against the night sky. "To successful ventures," she said, raising her glass, "and to clarity." Langston's voice carried an undercurrent that made her turn. "Clarity?" He approached slowly, predatory grace in his movements. "I've been contemplating a question since we agreed to this arrangement." His eyes held hers captive. "The contract my father created requires a genuine marriage, not merely a legal fiction." Understanding dawned in Della's expression. "You're worried about the consummation clause. I'm concerned about authenticity. The inheritance depends on it. And you believe I'd jeopardize everything by failing to fulfill that particular obligation." Her voice remained level, though her grip on the glass tightened. "I believe in verification." Langston moved closer. "Especially when rumors suggest experiences that might compromise our arrangement." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Rumors?" "About your time in South Africa, your relationship with Ambassador Kingsley." Della's laugh held no humor. "So you've been investigating me." "Due diligence. And what exactly did your due diligence uncover?" Her eyes flashed dangerously. "Nothing conclusive, hence my concern." She set down her glass with careful precision. "Let me understand you clearly. On our wedding night, you're questioning my... what exactly? My morality? My honesty?" Langston maintained eye contact. "I'm ensuring that our marriage meets all contractual requirements." by questioning whether I'm a virgin. Her incredulity was palpable. What century is this, Langston? Previous entanglements could invalidate the inheritance clause, are irrelevant, she cut him off, but clearly not to you. She turned away, but Langston caught her arm. My family's legacy is at stake. And mine isn't? Her voice rose slightly. I've sacrificed just as much for this arrangement. Then prove it's worth the sacrifice. His grip tightened. Prove the rumors wrong. Della's eyes widened, comprehension and fury dawning simultaneously. You want proof of my virtue tonight? I want certainty. His voice dropped lower. I want to know exactly who I've married. With deliberate slowness, she removed his hand from her arm. You want proof? She stepped closer, her body nearly touching his. Then take it. Claim your marital rights, Langston. Satisfy your medieval curiosity. The challenge hung between them, electric with tension. If you're not what this contract requires, he said softly, this marriage ends immediately, regardless of consequences. Della didn't flinch. And if I am, if your insulting suspicions prove baseless, then we proceed as agreed. No, her chin lifted. If your investigation finds me innocent, you owe me something more. An apology won't suffice. Name your price. Not tonight. Her smile was dangerous. I'll collect that debt when it serves me best. Their eyes locked in silent combat, neither willing to retreat. Then we have an agreement. Langston's hand rose to the zipper of her dress. Shall we begin? Without waiting for an answer, he turned her, fingers finding the delicate clasp at her neck. As the zipper descended, revealing the elegant curve of her spine, Langston felt something shift inside him, desire mingled with an unexpected hesitation. This wasn't how he'd imagined their wedding night, not with suspicion and challenge poisoning what could have been, at minimum, a mutually satisfying arrangement. Yet he couldn't stop now. Too much depended on certainty. The dress whispered to the floor, pooling at Della's feet like liquid moonlight. Chapter 3. The morning after dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold. Langston stood at the window, watching the city awaken below. His reflection showed a man transformed, hair tousled, eyes haunted, certainty shattered. Behind him the bed lay in disarray, sheets twisted from a night that had begun as interrogation and ended as revelation. Della's side was empty. The bathroom door opened. She emerged wrapped in his robe, hair damp from the shower, face scrubbed clean of makeup. Without the artifice of their public personas, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and infinitely more dangerous to his composure. "Good morning, husband." Her voice carried no warmth. Langston turned, steel returning to his spine. "Sleep well?" "Remarkably, considering." Her eyes held his, unflinching. "Have your doubts been sufficiently addressed?" The evidence of her innocence had been undeniable, leaving him both satisfied in his verification and strangely hollow in victory. "Completely. Excellent." She moved to the closet where a single suitcase waited. "Then our arrangement can proceed as planned. Where are you going?" "Lagos. The merger announcement with Nigerian Telecom won't wait." Her movements were precise as she selected clothing. "Your jet is fueled and waiting, as per our agreement." Langston watched her, conflict churning beneath his controlled exterior. Last night had proved her physical innocence, but awakened new questions about the woman he'd married. Her passion had been unexpected, fierce, uninhibited, contradicting her inexperience. She remained an enigma, one that increasingly occupied his thoughts. "About last night," he began. "A contractual obligation fulfilled." She disappeared into the bathroom, returning moments later dressed in a sleek business suit. Nothing more. Her dismissal stung more than it should have. "You're angry. I'm pragmatic. She closed the suitcase with a decisive click. You needed proof. You have it. Now I need to secure my father's legacy. The mention of her father triggered something in Langston. Unexpected empathy, or perhaps recognition of motivation he could understand. Della, save it. She faced him directly. You've shown me exactly who you are, Langston. A man so consumed by control, he would humiliate his wife on their wedding night, rather than risk vulnerability. The accuracy of her assessment left him momentarily speechless. I'll be in Lagos for 10 days, she continued, checking her watch. When I return, I expect my apartments to be ready. We'll establish a public appearance schedule that minimizes our actual time together. As she moved toward the door, Langston caught her arm. I was wrong. The words cost him, evident in the tightness of his jaw. Della looked down at his hand, then back to his face. Yes, you were. She removed herself from his grip. But being right brings me no satisfaction. What would? A sad smile touched her lips. The possibility that the man I married might have been worthy of trust. That possibility expired last night. Before he could respond, his phone chimed. Shanghai markets opening, requiring immediate attention. Duty calls, Della observed. Go ahead. Business is the mistress neither of us can ignore. When he finished the call, she was gone. On her pillow lay a single item, her wedding ring with a note beneath. When you're ready to begin this marriage with respect instead of suspicion, you may return this to me. Until then, I'll wear the public replica only. D. Langston stared at the platinum band, its diamonds catching morning light. In the wake of triumph, he tasted only ashes. His phone chimed again. A message from Jax. Urgent situation developing with Singapore acquisition. Conference call in 15 minutes. The business empire waited for no man's marital complications. With practiced efficiency, Langston pushed personal matters aside, focusing on what he could control. 3 hours later, he boarded his private jet for Singapore. The trip would take 18 hours, followed by days of intense negotiations. As the plane climbed above the clouds, Langston opened his briefcase. Inside, nestled in an interior pocket, was Della's ring. He'd taken it without conscious decision, a talisman, or perhaps a promise. Singapore would consume him for a week. By then, Della would be back from Lagos. They would reset, establish boundaries, move forward with their arrangement. The marriage would succeed. The inheritance would be secured. Control would be maintained. Yet, as Langston closed his eyes, it wasn't market projections that filled his mind, but the memory of Della's face in moonlight, her whispered confessions, and the unexpected feeling that had surged within him when she'd come apart in his arms. Desire was expected, possessiveness even, but this sensation was something foreign, something dangerous, something like awe. Chapter 4. The search Singapore's skyline glittered like a futuristic mirage as Langston exited the final negotiation. 7 days of relentless bargaining had yielded success. Truman Global now controlled the revolutionary quantum encryption technology that would transform communication security worldwide. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, a strange hollowness plagued him. Congratulations, sir. Jax handed him a tablet, displaying the freshly signed contracts. The board is ecstatic. Langston nodded, his attention drifting to another notification. No response to his third message to Della. Not unusual given their arrangement, but unsettling nonetheless. Has Mrs. Truman's office confirmed her attendance at the New York Gala next Thursday? He asked. Jax hesitated. No, sir. We've reached out several times. Try again. Emphasize the strategic importance of presenting a united front. In the limousine, Langston loosened his tie, fatigue settling into his bones. The Singapore acquisition had required every ounce of his legendary focus. Yet fragments of his attention had remained tethered to the woman who now carried his name. His phone rang. Winston Miles. Unusual. Winston, how's the treatment progressing? Where is she? The old man's voice was thin but sharp with accusation. Langston straightened. Della should be back from Lagos today. I've been in Singapore for... She never went to Lagos. 4 words, and Langston's world tilted. Explain. She cancelled the meetings 3 hours after your wedding. No one has seen her since she left your penthouse that morning. The information hit like a physical blow. That's impossible. Her security... She dismissed them at the airport, then never boarded the flight. She knows our security protocols intimately, designed half of them herself. If Della doesn't want to be found, she has the means to disappear. Langston's mind raced, calculating possibilities, consequences. A disagreement, nothing significant. Significant enough for my daughter to vanish. Accusation hardened Winston's tone. If you've hurt her, I need to make some calls. 3 hours later, Langston strode into his Manhattan penthouse, rage and something disturbingly like fear coursing through him. The investigation had yielded alarming results. Della had withdrawn $50,000 cash, taken her passport, and vanished. No credit card usage, no phone signal. Her final recorded words to her driver, "I need space to think clearly." The penthouse felt abandoned, her presence erased from spaces she'd barely occupied. In their bedroom, the wedding ring remained where she'd left it, the note now feeling like mockery. "Get me Phoenix Kavanaugh," he ordered Jax. "Now." Phoenix arrived an hour later, designer suit and dreadlocks creating a striking silhouette against the penthouse's minimalism. Her expression conveyed neither surprise nor concern. "Where is she?" Langston demanded. Phoenix raised an eyebrow. "Hello to you too, brother-in-law. I don't have time for games, and I don't have information you're entitled to." She moved past him. "Interesting. She always said she'd never live somewhere so cold." Langston stepped into her path. "Della has responsibilities. To her father's company. To our agreement." "To you?" Phoenix laughed without humor. "Is that what this is really about? Your wounded pride that your trophy wife failed to behave according to specification?" His jaw tightened. "You don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly." She moved closer. "I've known Della since we were 6 years old. She's brilliant, loyal, and stupidly self-sacrificing. She married you to save her father's legacy. Instead, she got... What exactly did she get, Langston?" The question hit uncomfortably close to the truth. "That's between my wife and me." "No, it's between you and your ego." Phoenix's eyes narrowed. "Whatever you did, it was enough to make her walk away from everything." Something in her words shifted Langston's understanding. Della hadn't merely left in anger, she'd escaped. "I need to find her." The admission carried more vulnerability than intended. Phoenix studied him. "Why? To finish breaking her, or because you actually care?" "I don't break things I value. But do you value her, or what she represents?" She shook her head. "You don't even know, do you?" Phoenix reached into her bag, retrieving an envelope. "To deliver this, she made me promise. 1 week after she left, no sooner." Langston opened the envelope, revealing Della's decisive handwriting. "Langston, by now you've discovered I'm gone. Don't waste resources searching. You won't find me until I'm ready to be found. I entered our marriage prepared for cold business, not cruelty. What happened between us crossed a line I cannot forgive easily. I need space to determine if this arrangement remains viable. I'll fulfill my public obligations in 3 weeks at the Truman Foundation Gala. Until then, consider this a reminder that I am not property to be verified or controlled." Your temporary wife, Della. He read it twice. Relief at confirmation of her return, battling with rage at her defiance. 3 weeks, he muttered. Unacceptable. Phoenix watched him with undisguised contempt. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about your schedule. This is about a woman reclaiming her dignity. By running away, by jeopardizing everything we've built. What exactly have you built, Langston? A marriage document, a business merger. Her voice softened with unexpected compassion. You had the chance to build something real with an extraordinary woman, and instead you treated her like a suspect. After she left, Langston stood at the window, Manhattan spread before him like a kingdom he suddenly found hollow. 3 weeks until Della returned. 3 weeks of speculation, of shareholders questioning their united front, of Winston Miles's accusing eyes. That night, he opened his laptop, initiating a search protocol reserved for securing acquisitions against corporate espionage. The target, his own wife. The objective, understanding. Financial records, academic histories, media appearances. Langston devoured them all. Della Miles emerged not as the convenient corporate bride he'd assumed, but as a woman of extraordinary depth. Her humanitarian work in Africa, her pioneering research on telecommunications infrastructure in developing nations, the scholarships she'd quietly established for young women in STEM fields. He woke from fitful sleep with a realization that shook him. He didn't just need to find his wife, he needed to earn her. The following morning, he summoned his executive team. Clear my schedule for the next 3 weeks. Jax looked up in alarm. Sir, the Tokyo merger can wait. The Malibu acquisition as well. Delegate what you can. Postpone the rest. May I ask why? Langston straightened his cuffs, decision crystallizing into determination. I have a more important acquisition to secure. 2 hours later, his private jet departed for Lagos. If Della wouldn't come to him, he would go to her world. He would learn what drove her, what she valued, what she fought for. It wasn't until the plane crossed the Atlantic that Langston acknowledged the uncomfortable truth. This wasn't just about saving their arrangement or securing his inheritance. Somewhere between suspicion and absence, he'd begun to crave something he'd never sought before. Understanding. Chapter 5. The Revelation. Lagos pulsed with chaotic vitality, a stark contrast to Manhattan's ordered affluence. Langston's driver navigated through crowded streets, passing markets overflowing with vibrant fabrics and street vendors hawking everything from fresh fruit to electronics. First time in Nigeria, sir? The driver asked, catching Langston's intense gaze in the rearview mirror. Yes. He didn't elaborate. Attention focused on the Miles Communications headquarters rising ahead, a gleaming tower of glass and sustainable bamboo, architecturally innovative yet harmonious with its surroundings. Inside, Langston was greeted with surprised deference. Mr. Truman, we weren't expecting you. The receptionist's accent lilted pleasantly. Mrs. Truman isn't here. I'm aware. His tone discouraged further questions. I'd like to see her office. Minutes later, he stood in Della's domain, a corner suite overlooking the city and harbor beyond. Unlike his stark minimalism, her space breathed with life. Local artwork adorned walls, photographs of infrastructure projects lined shelves, and a wall of windows bathed everything in natural light. Langston moved to her desk, noting its precise organization. A framed photo caught his attention. Della alongside young women in graduation caps, her smile radiant with pride. The inscription read, Miles Foundation Scholars, Class of 2023. She comes to every graduation, said a voice from the doorway. Langston turned to find an elegant woman watching him with undisguised suspicion. Her badge identified her as Dr. Amara Okafor, Director of Community Development. You're him, she stated, the husband. He inclined his head slightly. Langston Truman. I know who you are. Her tone suggested this wasn't necessarily positive. What I don't know is why you're in Della's office when she clearly wished for distance. Interesting. The staff knew of their separation. I'm trying to understand my wife. Dr. Okafor's laugh held no humor. Perhaps you should have attempted that before marriage. A fair criticism. His unexpected agreement appeared to surprise her. What can you tell me about these scholars? Something in his genuine curiosity softened her stance slightly. Della established the program 5 years ago. Full scholarships for girls from rural communities to study technology and business. Many returned to work here after graduation. She never mentioned this. There's much she doesn't mention. Dr. Okafor studied him. The women's shelter in Makoko, the mobile health clinics, the coding academies in areas without reliable electricity. Each revelation struck Langston like physical blows. How had he missed this dimension of the woman he'd married? I'd like to see these projects, he said. Dr. Okafor raised an eyebrow. Designer suits don't fare well in Makoko's floating slums. I'll manage. 3 days later, Langston stood in a small clinic built from repurposed shipping containers. His clothes were rumpled, his skin sunburned, but his eyes burned with newfound awareness. He'd seen Lagos through Della's vision, not as a market to conquer, but as communities to uplift. In a women's shelter established by the Miles Foundation, the director, Folemi, handed him a battered wooden box. Della leaves this when she visits, said it reminds her that pain can become purpose. Inside lay news clippings and photographs, a teenage Della alongside her mother at various humanitarian sites. Her mother died here, helping after the floods, Folami explained. Della was 16. Instead of running from the place of her greatest loss, she built her strongest connections here. That night in his hotel suite, Langston spread the contents of the box across his bed. Articles documented Elena Miles's death from a waterborne illness contracted while delivering medical supplies. Photographs showed a devastated Winston holding a stoic young Della at the funeral. One article quoted the teenage Della, "My mother believed connectivity could save lives. I will continue that work." Langston leaned back, pieces falling into place. Della's devotion to her father, her passion for telecommunications infrastructure in developing regions, her fierce independence. His phone chimed, Phoenix Kavanaugh. Unexpected. "Surprising development," he answered. "You calling me?" "Surprising development. You in Lagos, visiting Della's projects." Her tone was unreadable. "What game are you playing, Langston?" "No game. Research." "Research," she repeated skeptically. "Into what, exactly?" He considered his answer carefully. "Into the woman I married without knowing." Phoenix's silence stretched so long, he thought the call had dropped. Finally, "She's not in Lagos." "I know." "Do you know why she chose a business marriage with you?" Before he could respond, she continued, "Everyone assumes it was for her father's company, but that's only part of it." Langston waited, sensing important information approaching. 3 years ago, a European investment group approached Miles Communications with a hostile takeover attempt. They were smart, targeted when Winston was at his sickest. Della fought them off, but their CEO became obsessed with her. Harassment, stalking, the whole nightmare. Langston's grip tightened on the phone. "Who?" "Archer Kingsley." The name ignited instant recognition. The same man from the rumors about Della's past. The whispers about their affair were his revenge when she rejected him. He destroyed her previous relationship, threatened to tank Miles' communications stock with rumors. A marriage to you, becoming untouchable through the Truman name, was her protection strategy as much as her father's salvation. The revelation landed like thunder. The very rumors he'd used to doubt her had been weaponized against her before. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I spoke to her this morning. She asked about you." Phoenix's voice softened slightly. "Whatever you're doing, it's registering." After the call ended, Langston stood at the hotel window, watching Lagos shimmer under the setting sun. For decades, he'd approached relationships as transactions, assets and liabilities on a balance sheet. Della had been no different until now. Now, she was becoming devastatingly human. His phone rang again. Jack's, with news that couldn't wait. The Singapore acquisition had hit regulatory complications. The board demanded his immediate return. Old Langston would have been on his private jet within the hour, priorities never in question. New Langston hesitated. 20 minutes later, he entered the conference room of Miles Communications' Lagos headquarters, assembled staff eyeing him with curiosity. "I need to know everything about the microfinance program in northern Nigeria," he announced, "and the Rural Connectivity Initiative. My team in New York will handle the Singapore complications remotely." Dr. Okafor exchanged glances with colleagues. "May I ask why?" "Because I'm going to restructure Truman Global's African investment strategy to complement these programs rather than compete with them." He removed his jacket, rolling up sleeves. "And because I need to understand my wife's vision before I can earn the right to stand beside her." For the next week, Langston immersed himself in Della's world. He visited remote villages where Miles Communications' solar-powered internet hubs had transformed education. He witnessed microloans enabling women to start businesses. He observed mobile health clinics diagnosing diseases through telemedicine connections his wife had established. On his final night in Lagos, he received a text with an address in New Orleans. No sender identified, but he recognized the significance immediately. Della had reached out, indirectly, cautiously, but deliberately. As his plane lifted off African soil, Langston carried more than research. He carried understanding. The woman he'd married wasn't just a corporate asset or a convenient arrangement. She was extraordinary, and he had nearly destroyed any chance of truly knowing her. New Orleans awaited, humid and mysterious. Somewhere in its historic streets, Della was offering a tenuous thread of connection. This time, Langston wouldn't pull it until it broke. He would follow it, gently, wherever it led. Chapter 6. The confrontation. New Orleans embraced Langston with thick, perfumed air, jasmine and magnolia mingling with hints of bourbon and seafood. His driver navigated narrow streets lined with ornate iron balconies and colorful facades until they reached the Garden District, where sprawling historic homes stood behind wrought iron fences. The address led to a pale blue Victorian mansion, its generous porch adorned with ceiling fans turning lazily in the humid evening. Langston approached the gate, uncharacteristic uncertainty slowing his steps. Before he could ring the bell, the front door opened. A tall, muscular man with close-cropped hair and features that echoed Della's stepped onto the porch, arms crossed. "You must be the husband." His voice carried the musical New Orleans accent, but his expression remained guarded. "Langston Truman." He extended his hand through the gate. The man made no move to accept it. "Maximus Miles, Della's cousin and protector since we were kids. Give me one reason why I should let you through this gate." "Because Della sent me the address." "Phoenix sent you the address," Maximus corrected, descending the steps. "Important distinction." "Why are you here, Truman?" Langston met his gaze directly. "To see my wife." Funny thing about that word, a wife. Implies relationship, respect, trust. Maximus opened the gate but blocked the path. "From what I hear, you skipped those parts and went straight to ownership." The accusation stung more now than it would have 2 weeks ago. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Maximus's laugh held no humor. "Is that what rich white men call it when they treat women like property?" Langston felt his jaw tighten. "I'm here to speak with Della. not defend myself to you. That's where you're wrong. Maximus moved into his space, using his slight height advantage. In your world, you might be king. But this is our home, our sanctuary. And here you only get to Della through me. Tension crackled between them, two alpha predators circling. Part of Langston, the corporate raider who crushed opposition, itched to assert dominance. But another part, the man who'd witnessed Della's work in Lagos, recognized the protective instinct driving Maximus. You want me to prove myself worthy of seeing her? It wasn't a question. Now you're catching on. A woman's voice interrupted their standoff. Max, stop terrorizing him. An elegant older woman appeared on the porch, bearing Della's eyes and cheekbones. Aurelia Miles, Winston's sister and Della's aunt, descended with regal grace. Though I must say, she continued, it's refreshing to see him squirm a bit. Maximus stepped aside reluctantly as Aurelia approached. Mrs. Miles. Langston inclined his head respectfully. Aunt Aurelia, please. We're family now, supposedly. Her assessment was keen but not unkind. You look different from your wedding photos, less starched. Lagos has that effect, he admitted. Something in his response seemed to satisfy her. Della's not here. Disappointment crashed through him. The address is our family home, yes. She was here yesterday. Aurelia studied him. She needed space to think, and we Miles women do our best thinking by the water. She's at the lake house. I need to see her. Need? Her eyebrow arched. Interesting word choice. Before Langston could respond, thunder rumbled overhead. The subtropical afternoon had turned slate grey with impending storm. Hurricane season, Aurelia remarked. This one's strengthening offshore. They're naming it Eloise. The lake house. Is it safe? Langston asked, priorities shifting instantly. Maximus and Aurelia exchanged glances. Safer than most, Maximus answered. But she shouldn't be alone if it makes landfall. Give me the address. Hold on, Wall Street. Maximus raised his hand. You don't just get to charge in. I'll take him, Aurelia interrupted. The storm's coming faster than predicted. Better she's not alone out there. 30 minutes later, Langston sat beside Aurelia in her vintage Mercedes, windshield wipers battling increasing rain as they headed toward Lake Pontchartrain. She told us what happened, Aurelia said, breaking their silence. On your wedding night, Langston kept his eyes on the road. I imagine I'm not popular in the Miles family. You humiliated her. The simple statement carried weight beyond accusation. Della has faced many challenges. Her mother's death, her father's illness, that horrible man in Europe. Through everything, she maintained her dignity, her sense of self. Until I took it from her, Langston finished quietly. Aurelia's surprise at his understanding was evident. Yes. I didn't know her then, he admitted. I saw an arrangement, not a person. And now? He considered the question as rain lashed the car. Now I see someone extraordinary that I wounded thoughtlessly. Aurelia nodded slowly. That's a start. The lake house emerged through sheets of rain, a modernist structure of glass and steel perched on stilts near the water's edge. Lights glowed from within despite the darkening sky. I'll wait in the car, Aurelia said as they parked. This conversation doesn't need an audience. Langston nodded gratefully before facing the deluge. By the time he reached the steps, his designer clothes were soaked through. He hesitated, pulse accelerating, then knocked. Long moments passed before the door opened. Della stood framed in golden light, wearing jeans and an oversized sweater, hair loose around her shoulders. The casual attire made her look younger, more vulnerable than her corporate armor allowed. Her expression revealed surprise, quickly masked. Langston. Hello, Della. Water dripped from his clothes onto the porch. Her eyes swept his drenched form. You went to Lagos, not a question. She'd been keeping tabs on him, just as he had on her. Yes. Why? The simplicity of the question demanded equal honesty. To understand what I'd broken. Something flickered in her eyes, skepticism battling curiosity. Without comment, she stepped back, allowing him entrance. The interior was warm and minimalist, glass walls showcasing the angry lake beyond. Wind howled around the structure, intensifying the sense of isolation. "Your aunt brought me," Langston explained, accepting the towel she offered. The hurricanes accelerated. They were concerned. "Eloise." Della nodded, moving to check her phone. Category 3 now, projected to strengthen before landfall. She glanced up. "You should both leave before the roads flood." "Della." "I've weathered hurricanes before, Langston. This house is built for them." "I didn't come about the storm." She set down her phone, arms crossing defensively. "Why did you come then? Business emergency? Public appearance needed? Or just to confirm I haven't violated our contract while exercising my private autonomy?" The bitterness in her tone was deserved. "I came to apologize." "For what, specifically?" "The suspicion, the accusations, or the way you used my body to verify my worth?" Each word landed like a physical blow. "For all of it. For reducing you to a transaction when you deserve to be valued as the extraordinary person you are." Surprise flickered across her features before skepticism returned. What exactly happened in Lagos to prompt this revelation? "I saw you." His voice softened. "Not the corporate asset I married, but the woman who builds schools in villages without electricity, who funds microloans for women entrepreneurs, who honors her mother's legacy by saving lives through connectivity." Her expression remained guarded. "You went through my projects. I wanted to understand who I'd married, who I'd hurt." Langston moved closer, still maintaining respectful distance. "The rumors about Kingsley were lies," she finished sharply. "Revenge from a man who couldn't accept rejection." "I know. Phoenix told me." Della's eyes widened. "Phoenix spoke to you? Voluntarily?" "She's still firmly on your side," he assured her, "but she saw I was trying to understand." The sound of Aurelia's car horn interrupted them. Della moved to the window, watching her aunt gesture urgently before driving away. "Roads are flooding already," she murmured. "She's heading back before they close the causeway." "I should go." Langston moved toward the door. "You can't." Della's voice held no emotion. "The warning system just triggered. We're under mandatory shelter orders now." Reality settled between them. They were trapped together as the storm intensified. The prospect of hours confined with the husband she'd fled hung in the air, tense with unresolved emotions. Della moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets. "There's food, water, backup generator. We'll be fine until it passes." "I'm not concerned about the hurricane," Langston said quietly. She paused, back still turned. "What are you concerned about?" "Whether there's any way to rebuild what I destroyed before it had a chance to exist." Her shoulders tensed. She turned slowly, eyes meeting his with the direct gaze that had first caught his attention. "And what exactly do you think that was, Langston?" "Possibility," he answered simply. "The possibility of building something real from an arranged beginning." Lightning flashed, illuminating the vulnerability in his usually controlled expression. Thunder followed immediately, vibrating through the house's frame. Della's laugh held no humor. "You accused me of sexual impropriety, demanded proof of my virtue, and treated me like a commodity. Now you want a real marriage. I want the chance to earn your forgiveness." He closed the distance between them. "The chance to know you, truly know you, and for you to know me beyond the corporate facade." "Why?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What changed?" Langston hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound manipulative or calculated. I changed, he said finally. Seeing your work, understanding your motivations, learning about Kingsley's vendetta, it forced me to confront the man I've become, a man who values control over connection, who verifies rather than trusts. The storm raged outside, mirroring the emotional turbulence within. Della stood perfectly still, searching his face for deception and finding only raw honesty. I don't trust easily, Langston. Her voice was almost lost beneath the wind's howl. Not anymore. I know. He reached slowly into his pocket, retrieving her wedding ring. I've carried this since you left it, not to return it until I deserve to. She stared at the platinum band glittering in his palm. And do you think you deserve to now? No, he admitted, but I'm asking for the chance to try. Beyond the windows, Lake Pontchartrain churned with hurricane fury, waves crashing against the shoreline. Inside, two people stood at their own crossroads, one seeking redemption, the other weighing the risk of another wound, against the possibility of something authentic growing from artificial beginnings. The power failed before Della could respond, plunging them into storm-shadowed twilight. Chapter 7. The storm darkness enveloped them as wind screamed around the lake house. Della moved with practiced efficiency, locating battery-powered lanterns that cast long shadows across the modern interior. Generator should kick in automatically, she said, voice calm despite the chaos outside. If not, there's a manual override in the basement. Langston watched her methodical preparation, the way she checked windows, secured loose items, moved with purpose rather than panic. This was yet another side of his wife he'd never witnessed, cool competence in crisis. What can I do? He asked. She glanced up, seeming surprised by the offer. Check the basement door. Sometimes it sticks during pressure changes. They worked in tandem, securing the house against Eloise's growing fury. When the generator hummed to life, restoring limited power to essential systems, Della visibly relaxed. We should be fine now, she said, pushing damp hair from her face. The structure's rated for Category 5. Worst case, we lose the dock and some landscaping. Langston nodded, acutely aware of the greater storm between them. More dangerous than any hurricane. You're good at this. Crisis management. Practice. She moved to the kitchen, filling an electric kettle. Tea, please. The mundane activity created illusion of normalcy, though nothing about their situation was normal. Married strangers trapped by nature's fury, forced into proximity when emotional wounds remained raw. Della handed him a steaming mug. My mother was a catastrophe nurse, she said unexpectedly. Taught me to prepare for worst-case scenarios without letting fear dictate decisions. Is that why you went into infrastructure development? Preparation against disaster? Her eyebrow raised slightly, surprised by his insight. Partly. Connectivity saves lives during crises, remote diagnosis, early warning systems, resource coordination. Your mother would be proud. The words emerged without calculation. Something shifted in Della's expression, wariness giving way to momentary openness. She would have liked the Nigerian telemedicine program. Tell me about her. The simple request breached the professional wall between them. For a moment, Della seemed to consider maintaining distance, but the storm's isolation created strange intimacy. Elena Miles, brilliant, fearless, stubborn. A small smile touched her lips. She met my father when he was installing communication systems in Honduras after an earthquake. She was treating survivors, called him an arrogant corporate vulture capitalizing on misfortune. Sounds familiar, Langston commented, earning a reluctant smile. Dad always said he fell in love instantly. Took him 6 months to convince her he actually cared about connecting isolated communities. Della sipped her tea. They were opposites in many ways, but shared core values. Partnership in its truest form. Unlike our arrangement, Langston acknowledged quietly, the house shuddered as a powerful gust struck. Della moved to the windows, watching palm trees bend like rubber in the wind. I was 16 when she died, she continued, back turned to him. Cholera outbreak after flooding in Nigeria. She insisted on going despite the risks. Said doctors couldn't ask others to take chances they wouldn't take themselves. That shaped you. She turned, studying him with newfound curiosity. You've done your research. I've tried to understand the woman I should have known before making accusations. A particularly violent wind gust rattled the windows. Simultaneously, a sharp crack echoed from outside. Both moved to look as lightning illuminated a massive oak tree, suddenly precarious near the house. Basement, Della decided instantly. That tree won't hold if the winds increase. They gathered essentials, lanterns, water, phones, and descended narrow stairs to a surprisingly comfortable space. Equipment storage lined one wall, but the remainder resembled a small apartment. Sofa, television, even a compact kitchen area. My storm bunker, Della explained. I sometimes stay here during hurricane season to monitor community response systems. As if punctuating her explanation, the house above groaned under another assault from Eloise's fury. Despite the concrete surrounding them, they felt the vibration of impact. That was the tree, Langston observed. Della nodded, checking her phone. No signal. Expected during the worst of it. How long will this last? Hours, probably. She arranged lanterns around the space. We're stuck with each other, Langston. The statement hung between them, acknowledgement of their forced proximity and the conversation they couldn't avoid. I read your Humanitarian Foundation's mission statement, Langston said, changing course. Connectivity creates community, simple but profound. Della settled onto the sofa, watching him carefully. Why did you really go to Lagos, Langston? Truth, not the polished version. The question demanded honesty he wasn't accustomed to giving. Initially, to understand what I was losing. Your disappearance threatened the inheritance, the Singapore acquisition, everything I'd worked for. Her expression hardened, but he continued before she could respond. Then I saw the scholarship recipients, the women's shelter, the mobile clinics. His voice softened. I went looking for leverage and found purpose instead, your purpose. And that changed your motivation? It changed everything. Langston moved closer, still maintaining respectful distance. I've spent my life accumulating power, Della, measuring success in acquisitions and influence. You measure it in lives improved, communities transformed. Another crash from above interrupted them. The lights flickered once, then stabilized. Pretty words, Della said when silence returned, but they don't erase what happened between us. I don't expect them to. Langston met her gaze directly. What I did was unforgivable. Testing you, doubting you, using physical intimacy as verification rather than connection. Then why are you here? The question held genuine confusion. If you don't expect forgiveness, what do you want? The chance to be worthy of the woman I married. The admission cost him his carefully constructed facade. Not because of the inheritance or business advantages, but because you deserve a partner who values your brilliance, your compassion, your integrity. Della's eyes widened at his vulnerability. For a man like Langston Truman, this emotional exposure was more revealing than physical nakedness. Lagos changed you that much? Doubt tinged her voice. You changed me. He closed the remaining distance, kneeling before her. Seeing the world through your eyes, understanding what drives you, it forced me to examine what drives me, what I've become. And what have you become, Langston? A man who accumulated wealth, but neglected value. His voice roughened with emotion. A man who inherited his father's worst traits, control, suspicion, emotional detachment, while rejecting his capacity for vision. Thunder crashed overhead as Eloise reached peak intensity. In the lantern light, Della's expression reflected the storm's complexity, skepticism battling with something softer, more dangerous than anger. "What happens if I believe you? If I give you this chance?" she asked. "We return to New York, play happy couple for the cameras, share living space but lead separate lives?" "No." Langston shook his head. "I'm not asking for the arrangement we agreed to. I'm asking for something real. Difficult, complicated, genuine." Della stood abruptly, pacing the confined space. "You don't even know me, Langston." "I want to." He remained kneeling, unusual humility from a man accustomed to dominance. "Not through dossiers or background checks, but through this, conversation, revelation, truth." The foundation shook with another violent impact. Dust drifted from the ceiling as something massive collided with the structure above. Della instinctively moved toward Langston, survival instinct momentarily overriding emotional barriers. His arms encircled her protectively as the world seemed to splinter around them. When the rumbling subsided, they remained connected, heartbeats synchronized in aftermath of danger. "Are you all right?" Langston asked, genuine concern evident. Della nodded against his chest, then seemed to realize their position and stepped back. The oak must have hit the house. The moment shattered, but something essential had passed between them, instinctive trust in crisis. "Della," Langston began, voice gentle, "I don't expect immediate forgiveness or trust. Both must be earned. I'm asking for the opportunity to earn them." Outside, Hurricane Eloise continued her rampage across the Gulf Coast. Inside, in lantern-lit sanctuary, two people faced a different kind of natural force, the irresistible pull toward authentic connection despite barriers of pride and pain. "One chance," Della whispered, decision forming in real time. "Not for the business arrangement or public appearances, but for the possibility of something genuine." Langston nodded, understanding the gravity of what she offered. "That's all I ask." As the storm raged toward its inevitable conclusion, they talked through the night, sharing histories, regrets, aspirations. For the first time, they met as equals, without agendas or pretense. By morning, when Eloise had spent her fury and dawn painted the flooded landscape in gentle pinks and golds, something had shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility, tenuous, fragile, genuine. The storm had changed them both. Chapter 8. The Rivals. Sunlight streamed through the windows of Aurelia's Victorian as Della sipped coffee on the wide porch. 3 days had passed since Hurricane Eloise's fury. The storm had damaged the lake house roof and destroyed the dock, but had gifted something unexpected, a fragile truce between Della and Langston. They'd returned to New Orleans once roads cleared, retreating to separate rooms in her aunt's house. Distance by day, honest conversations by night, a strange courtship after their backward beginning. "Morning, sunshine?" Maximus emerged from the house, eyeing his cousin skeptically. "How's the marriage rehabilitation project going?" Della smiled despite herself. "Don't call it that." "What would you call it?" "The Billionaire's Redemption Tour." "I'd call it complicated." She watched a hummingbird dart among Aurelia's flower pots. "He's different from what I expected." Before she could elaborate, Langston appeared in the doorway, looking incongruously casual in borrowed clothes, jeans and a simple button-down, replacing his usual bespoke suits. "Morning." His eyes found Della's, a private message passing between them. Maximus made a theatrical gagging sound. "I'm getting breakfast." He clapped Langston's shoulder as he passed, the gesture both warning and reluctant acceptance. Langston took his place beside Della, accepting the coffee she offered. Your family's protective instincts are impressive. The Miles fortress, she agreed, impenetrable to outsiders. His phone buzzed, the third time in 30 minutes. Della noticed his deliberate choice to ignore it. Singapore? She guessed. Langston nodded. The regulatory issues escalated, boards demanding my return. You should go. The words carried no accusation. Business won't wait, even for hurricanes and marital reckonings. It can wait another day. His gaze remained on her. The foundation gala's tomorrow night in New York. I thought we might fly back together. The invitation stood between them, return as a united front, their first public appearance since the wedding. The prospect stirred complicated emotions. Their conversations during and after the storm had built bridges across the chasm between them, but trust remained tenuous. All right, she agreed finally. Together. Something like relief crossed his features. Before he could respond, a sleek black Audi pulled up to the curb. The man who emerged made Della freeze mid-breath. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in European tailoring, Archer Kingsley approached the gate with confident strides. "Della Miles," he called, his British accent carrying easily across the garden. "Or should I say, Mrs. Truman now?" Langston straightened, instantly alert to her tension. "Who is that?" "Archer Kingsley." The name felt poisonous on her tongue. "European Telecom Group." Understanding darkened Langston's expression. "The stalker, the source of the rumors." She nodded tightly as Archer reached the gate. "What a delightful surprise," Archer continued, voice oozing false charm. "I was in Houston for energy sector meetings when I heard about the hurricane hitting New Orleans. Your assistant in New York mentioned your father was staying with family here. Simple deduction from there." "You've been monitoring my office communications," Della said, anger rising in her voice. Archer smiled without warmth. "Intelligence gathering is essential in telecommunications. You taught me that." Langston moved protectively beside Della. "Mr. Kingsley, unexpected visit." Archer's gaze shifted, assessing Langston with calculating precision. "Ah, the husband himself. Congratulations on your recent nuptials. Surprising development, that." "Not when you understand what Della was escaping," Langston replied coolly. Something dangerous flickered in Archer's expression. "Escaping? What an interesting characterization." He turned back to Della. "I actually come with a business proposition. ETG is expanding our Africa-Middle East division. We need someone with your expertise." "I'm not interested," Della replied flatly. 10 million annual salary, complete operational autonomy, triple your current foundation budget." Archer's smile sharpened. "And distance from your arrangement." Langston's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing Della to handle the confrontation. "My answer remains no," she stated firmly. "Now please leave. At least review the proposal." Archer removed a sleek folder from his briefcase, extending it through the gate. "For old time's sake." Before Della could refuse again, the front door banged open. Maximus emerged like a storm front, moving with purposeful strides. "Kingsley," his voice carried deadly quiet, "you're trespassing." Archer's expression flickered with recognition and something like fear. "Maximus Miles, still playing protector, I see. Last warning." Maximus reached the gate. "Leave now, or I'll remove you." Tension crackled between them, clearly not their first confrontation. Archer hesitated, then placed the folder on the gatepost. "The offer remains open, Della." His eyes slid meaningfully to Langston. "When your situation becomes untenable, as we both know it will." After he departed, Della released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I should have hit him," Maximus muttered. "Last time you did that, he pressed charges," Della reminded him. Langston observed the exchange with growing comprehension. This has happened before." Della nodded, reclaiming her seat. "After I rejected his advances in Cape Town, he became persistent. Maximus happened to be visiting when Archer refused to leave my apartment. I introduced his face to my fist," Maximus confirmed without remorse. "Restraining order followed. For me, not him, ironically." Langston retrieved the folder from the gatepost, offering it to Della. "Are you curious?" The question contained no accusation or jealousy, merely honest inquiry, another small indication of his evolution. "No." She took the folder and dropped it into a nearby trash can. "ETG's business practices violate everything I believe in. Besides, his offer isn't about business. It's about possession," Langston finished, understanding darkening his eyes. "I recognize the mindset." His candid self-awareness surprised her. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed yet again. This time, his expression changed as he read the message. "Singapore?" she asked. "Yes, the Regulatory Commission moved up our hearing." Conflict clouded his features. "If I'm not there tomorrow morning, we could lose the acquisition entirely." "Then you should go now." Della's voice held certainty. "I'll meet you in New York for the gala." "Della, this is business, Langston. I understand its importance." She meant it sincerely. "Go save your acquisition. I'll be there tomorrow night." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "My jet will return for you after dropping me in Singapore." 4 hours later, Della stood on the tarmac watching Langston's plane disappear into clouds. Their goodbye had been surprisingly difficult, a reluctance to separate after days of cautious reconnection. Maximus appeared beside her as she turned to leave. "You're really giving him another chance." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I'm considering it. Despite everything. He's changing, Max. I've seen it." She linked her arm through her cousin's. "The hurricane showed me a different man than the one I married." Back at Aurelia's, Della packed for New York, while her mind replayed moments from the hurricane, Langston's vulnerability in the basement, his willingness to listen rather than dictate, the way he'd instinctively protected her when danger threatened. Her phone chimed with a text from Phoenix. "Archer spotted at Brennan's with ETG board members. A contact in their legal department says he's been obsessively tracking your movements since the wedding. Be careful." Unease prickled along Della's spine. Archer's appearance wasn't coincidental. His pathological need to possess what he couldn't have made him dangerous, particularly now that she'd found potential happiness with Langston. Another text arrived, this one from Langston. "Landed in Singapore. Missing our conversations already. See you tomorrow at the gala." The simple message warmed her unexpectedly. Their relationship was evolving into something neither had anticipated, something potentially real. As twilight settled over New Orleans, Della sat with Aurelia on the porch, seeking the older woman's wisdom. "You're falling for him," Aurelia observed, always direct. "The question is whether you're falling for who he truly is or who he's temporarily pretending to be." "I don't think he's pretending," Della replied thoughtfully. "The man I glimpsed during the hurricane, vulnerable, thoughtful, capable of growth, I believe that's his authentic self beneath the corporate armor. Then the real question becomes, is that enough to build upon after such a wounded beginning?" Before Della could answer, her phone rang, an unknown international number. Archer's voice filled the line when she answered. "Have you reconsidered my offer?" No greeting, no pleasantries. "I told you I'm not interested." "Pity?" His tone chilled. "Because your husband might not be available to fulfill his marital obligations much longer." Della's blood froze. "What are you talking about?" "Singapore can be dangerous for unwary businessmen." A smile colored his voice. especially when they've made enemies in certain markets. The call disconnected, leaving Della staring at her phone in horror as understanding dawned. Archer hadn't come to New Orleans merely to make a business offer. He'd come to gloat before putting something terrible into motion. Her hands shook as she dialed Langston's number, praying he would answer. Chapter 9. The Distance. Della paced her New York penthouse, phone pressed to her ear. Still nothing? No, ma'am. Jax's voice carried unusual tension. Mr. Truman attended the regulatory hearing, then had a private meeting with Singaporean officials. He left the ministry building at 9:40 p.m. local time. Security cameras show him entering his car. After that, nothing. 6 hours. Langston had been unreachable for 6 hours. The local police have been notified, but they're requiring 24 hours before declaring him missing. Frustration edged Jax's voice. I've activated our private security protocols. Teams are searching now. I'm coming to Singapore. Mrs. Truman, that might not be. Have the jet ready in an hour. Della ended the call, already moving toward her closet. Phoenix appeared in the doorway, concern etched on her features. What's happening? Langston's missing in Singapore. Della pulled a suitcase from the closet, and I'm certain Archer is behind it. You can't know that for sure. Phoenix followed her into the bedroom. Corporate rivals, regulatory enemies, Langston Truman has a long list of potential adversaries. Archer called me yesterday. Della's hands trembled slightly as she packed. Said Langston might not be available to fulfill his marital obligations, then made a comment about Singapore being dangerous. Phoenix stilled. You think he'd go that far? I think his obsession has festered for years. I think my marriage pushed him over an edge. Della paused, vulnerability breaking through her composed exterior, and I think I might have finally found something real with Langston, only to lose him to a madman's revenge. The admission hung between them, the first time she'd verbalized the emotional shift that had occurred during the hurricane. Her phone vibrated with an incoming call. Unknown international number. Same as yesterday. Della activated the recording function before answering. Where is he? Straight to business. Archer's voice carried smug satisfaction. No pleasantries. Where is my husband? Each word emerged like a separate threat. Safe enough. For now. Background noises suggested Archer was in a vehicle. He's quite resourceful, your Langston. Put up quite a struggle when my associates extended their invitation. What do you want? Della's knuckles whitened around the phone. What I've always wanted, darling. You. His voice dropped to intimate softness. Your brilliance, your vision, your companionship, away from Truman's dominance. You're delusional. Am I? You married for business and protection, not love. I'm offering you the same arrangement with better terms. His tone hardened. ETG's director position, 10 million annually, complete autonomy, and your husband's safe return. The pieces clicked into terrible clarity. This is a kidnapping. I prefer to call it leverage. Archer's false charm evaporated. Langston Truman took what was meant to be mine. Now I'm negotiating terms. Let me speak to him. All in good time. You have 24 hours to accept my offer. After that. He let the implication hang. After the call disconnected, Della stood frozen for a moment before springing into action, her mind working methodically despite her fear. We're not giving in to his demands, she told Phoenix firmly, but we need proof before involving authorities. For the next hour, Della worked with focused intensity, accessing systems and databases Phoenix hadn't known she could reach. Since when are you a hacker? Phoenix asked, watching strings of code fill the screen. Since Archer's first harassment campaign. Della's expression remained concentrated. I learned to track digital footprints after he started sending anonymous threats. What exactly are you looking for? Patterns. Della's eyes never left the screen. Archer's methodical, He'll have used resources connected to ETG, properties, shell companies, transportation. Another hour passed before Della straightened, triumph flashing in her eyes. Got him. Where? Private estate outside Singapore, registered to AK Holdings, a shell company that received funding from an ETG subsidiary 3 months ago. Phoenix stared at her with newfound respect. What's the plan? Before Della could answer, her phone rang. Jack's. 17 hours later, Della strode through Singapore General Hospital, heart pounding against her ribs. Jax met her outside a private room, his usually impeccable appearance dishevelled from sleepless hours. "How is he?" she demanded. "Stable." Jax ran a hand through his hair. "We found him through an anonymous tip to Singapore authorities. A fishing boat discovered him in the water near Sentosa Island. Archer's men had taken him to that estate you identified, drugged him, and interrogated him about Truman Global's quantum encryption technology. When he refused to cooperate, they attempted to stage an accident, drugged him again and threw him overboard from a yacht." "How did he survive?" Della whispered, horrified. "Langston said he'd been feigning deeper sedation than he actually experienced. When they thought he was unconscious, he managed to remain conscious enough to swim after being thrown overboard. A passing fishing boat spotted him struggling in the water and rescued him." Relief and admiration washed through Della. "He's always been stubborn. The doctors say it's miraculous he survived. The combination of drugs in his system should have rendered swimming impossible." "And his injuries?" "Concussion, 3 broken ribs, numerous contusions, but nothing life-threatening." Della closed her eyes briefly, gathering her composure. "I need to see him." Jax nodded, opening the door. The sight that greeted her stole her breath. Langston, usually so commanding and indomitable, looked vulnerable against white hospital sheets. Bruises darkened his jaw and temple, an IV line snaked into his arm, and monitoring equipment surrounded the bed. His eyes opened at her entrance, recognition and something more profound lighting his features. "Della." Her name emerged as a hoarse whisper. She crossed the room in 3 strides, carefully taking his hand in hers. "I'm here." "Kingsley," he managed, wincing with the effort. "It was—" "I know." She squeezed his hand gently. "Don't speak. Rest now." "No." His fingers tightened around hers with surprising strength. "Listen," he wanted information about Truman Global's quantum encryption technology. Della frowned. "I thought this was about me. About us." "That was secondary." Langston shifted painfully. "Kingsley's been trying to acquire our encryption patents for ETG. When we wouldn't sell, he targeted me, and used me as the excuse," she finished, understanding dawning. "The personal vendetta provided cover for corporate espionage." "Yes." His thumb traced circles on her palm, an unexpectedly intimate gesture. "When I wouldn't give him the encryption keys, they decided to dispose of the problem." Anger flared hot and bright within her chest. He'll pay for this. Already in motion. A ghost of Langston's usual confidence surfaced. "Jax has gathered evidence. Singapore authorities are securing warrants. That's not enough." Determination hardened her voice. "Archer's slipped through legal consequences before. He's too well connected." "What are you thinking?" Langston studied her face, recognizing the strategic focus in her eyes. "I'm thinking it's time to use Truman Miles' resources for something more satisfying than quarterly profits." Her smile carried dangerous intent. "Are you up for a partnership, husband?" Despite his injuries, Langston's answering smile matched hers. "I thought you'd never ask, wife." For the next 3 days, they worked from his hospital room, Della handling communications while Langston made strategic calls despite doctors' objections. Their collaboration revealed unexpected synchronicity, each anticipating the other's thoughts with uncanny precision. On the fourth day, as Langston signed discharge papers, breaking news alerts flashed across every financial network. European Telecom Group CEO Archer Kingsley detained on industrial espionage charges. Phase 1 complete, Della murmured, showing Langston her tablet screen. Perfect timing. He stood carefully, still moving gingerly with his injuries. The board meeting starts in 2 hours. In ETG's Singapore boardroom, executive faces registered shock as Della and Langston entered. Her confident, him bruised but unbowed. Without invitation, they took seats at the head of the table. "Your CEO is facing criminal charges," Langston began without preamble. "Industrial espionage, attempted murder, kidnapping." "These are serious allegations," stammered ETG's legal counsel. "Without Mr. Kingsley present, we're not here to debate his guilt." Della's voice cut through objections. "We're here to offer ETG's board a choice." Langston took over seamlessly. Option 1. Truman Global and Miles Communications file civil suits against ETG for your CEO's actions. Combined with criminal proceedings, your stock will collapse before quarter's end. Option 2, Della continued. ETG divests its African operations to Miles Foundation for $1, terminates Archer Kingsley regardless of criminal case outcomes, and implements the ethics protocols outlined in this document. She slid folders across the table, perfectly synchronized with Langston's next statement. In return, Truman Miles offers technology-sharing agreements that will keep ETG competitive in the quantum encryption market. The board members exchanged glances, stunned by the coordinated assault. "You have 1 hour to decide," Langston concluded, standing carefully. In the hallway outside, safe from observation, Langston's composed facade faltered slightly. Della moved to support him, arms sliding around his waist. "You should be in bed," she chided gently. "Worth it." His arm settled across her shoulders, the contact feeling unexpectedly right. "We make quite the team, Della Truman." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Yes, we do." Something shifted between them in that moment, the final barrier dissolving. What had begun as an arranged marriage, evolved through crisis and revelation, now transformed into something neither had anticipated. Partnership, respect, perhaps even the beginning of love. "Take me home," Langston said softly, the request carrying deeper meaning than mere location. Della smiled, understanding perfectly. Home it is. Chapter 10. The Return. 3 days after Archer's detention, doctors finally cleared Langston for travel. Though his injuries still required attention, his determination to return to New York before the Truman Foundation Gala outweighed medical caution. "The board expects a united front," he explained to Dr. Chen, who frowned at his insistence. "And I need to be there." "What your body needs is rest," the doctor countered, but signed the discharge papers nonetheless. "Mrs. Truman, I trust you'll ensure he follows the recovery protocols." Della, who hadn't left Langston's side since arriving in Singapore, nodded solemnly. "I'll make sure of it." As they prepared to board the private jet, Jax approached with the latest updates on ETG's implosion following their boardroom ultimatum. "Stock down 40% since Kingsley's arrest. 3 board members resigned. The African operations divestiture is proceeding ahead of schedule." "And the security protocols?" Langston asked, moving carefully up the jet stairs with Della's subtle support. "Implementation begins tomorrow. Miles Foundation representatives are overseeing the transition." Once airborne, ensconced in the jet's luxurious cabin, Langston finally allowed himself to relax. The constant vigilance required in Singapore, maintaining his corporate persona despite physical pain, had taken its toll. "You're exhausted," Della observed, arranging pillows behind him. "Sleep. We have 14 hours before New York." "There's too much to discuss," he protested weakly. "The gala, the board meeting, the press statement about Kingsley." All can wait. She settled beside him, her hand finding his. You nearly died, Langston. The world won't collapse if you rest for a few hours. He studied her face, noting the shadows beneath her eyes, the tension she'd carried since his kidnapping. You haven't been sleeping either. A small smile touched her lips. Touché. Perhaps we both need rest. As the jet cruised above the Pacific, something shifted in their dynamic. The frantic urgency of the crisis past, they found themselves in an unfamiliar space, intimate without immediate external threats driving them together. When Kingsley's men had me, Langston said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, I kept thinking about our conversations at the lake house. Della's expression softened. The hurricane basement. Yes. His fingers intertwined with hers, the gesture deliberate. All those years of accumulating power, influence, control, none of it mattered when I thought I might not see you again. The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the calculating businessman she'd married, nor even the evolving man she'd glimpsed during the hurricane. This was someone new, shaped by near death, tempered by vulnerability. I was terrified, she admitted quietly. Not just of losing you, but of losing the possibility of what we might become. And what might we become, Della? His eyes held hers, seeking answers to questions neither had dared ask before. Before she could respond, the satellite phone rang. Winston Miles, his concern evident even through the staticky connection. After assuring her father of Langston's recovery, Della handed the phone to her husband. Winston, Langston greeted him, straightening despite his injuries. Your daughter is quite formidable when someone threatens her family. So I've heard. Winston's voice carried grudging respect. She gets that from her mother. I'm beginning to understand where all her remarkable qualities originate. The conversation continued briefly, Winston extracting promises about Langston's recovery protocols before disconnecting. When Della returned from stowing the phone, she found Langston watching her with undisguised admiration. Your father called me family, he noted. Progress from the man who suspected I'd hurt you in some way. You've earned his respect, she replied, reclaiming her seat beside him. Mine as well. Just respect. The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Della considered him thoughtfully. What are we doing, Langston? Really? Is this still about the inheritance clause? About preserving appearances? No, his response came without hesitation. It hasn't been about that since the hurricane. Maybe even before. Then what? He took her hand again, his thumb tracing patterns on her skin. I think we're discovering what might have been possible if we'd begun this marriage differently. If I hadn't been blinded by suspicion and control. If we'd trusted rather than verified. A small smile played at her lips. Precisely. His expression grew serious. When we return to New York, the press will want statements about Kingsley, about Singapore, about us. Before we craft those narratives, I need to know, is this real? What's growing between us? The question demanded honesty she'd rarely allowed herself. It's real, she said finally. Unexpected, unplanned, perhaps unwise given how we began, but real nonetheless. Relief washed across his features. Then perhaps this arrangement has evolved into something neither of us anticipated. A genuine partnership, she offered. More than that. His voice softened. I've spent my life avoiding emotional entanglements, seeing them as weaknesses to be exploited. Then you disappeared after our wedding night, and I felt hollow, as if something essential had been torn away. The admission hung in the air between them, profound in its simplicity. When they told me you were missing in Singapore, Della confessed, I realized I'd been falling for you since that night in the hurricane shelter, despite our beginning, despite everything. Langston's hand rose to cup her cheek gently. I don't deserve this second chance. Neither of us do, she countered. We both entered this marriage for practical reasons, both protected ourselves from vulnerability. And now? Now we decide if we're brave enough to build something authentic from artificial beginnings. His smile held a warmth she'd never witnessed before. I've never backed away from a challenge. Neither have I. She leaned forward slightly, her intent clear. Their kiss held none of the performative quality of their wedding day. Instead, it carried tenderness, promise, and unexpected passion despite Langston's injuries. When they separated, something fundamental had transformed between them. I love you, Della, he said quietly, the words emerging without calculation or strategy. Not for business advantage or social appearance, but for exactly who you are. The declaration, so unexpected from a man who had once approached their marriage as a transaction, stole her breath. In the silence that followed, they both recognized the transformation their journey had wrought, from arrangement to authenticity, from contract to connection. As the jet continued its arc toward New York, Della settled against Langston's side, careful of his injuries, her head resting on his shoulder. Outside their window, dawn painted the horizon in shades of possibility. When we land, she murmured, we'll have press conferences, statements, the gala. And after that? He asked, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Della smiled against his shoulder. After that, we begin again, properly this time. I like the sound of that. His arm tightened around her, protective yet reverent. Take me home, wife. She looked up, meeting his gaze with newfound certainty. Home it is, husband. Chapter 11. The Betrayal. New York welcomed them with unseasonable warmth. September sunshine gilding skyscrapers as their car navigated Manhattan streets. After Singapore's intensity, returning felt like stepping into another life. One where Langston and Della were no longer adversaries or reluctant partners, but something far more profound. The boards called an emergency meeting, Jax informed them as they entered Truman Tower. News of Kingsley's arrest has created questions. Good, Langston replied, his hand finding Della's naturally. It's time for transparency. The boardroom fell silent as they entered together. Langston moved with careful dignity despite healing injuries, while Della matched his confidence with her own commanding presence. Gentlemen, ladies, Langston began without preamble. Recent events in Singapore have accelerated plans I intended to announce more gradually. He outlined the merger of Miles Communications' humanitarian projects with Truman Global's technological innovations. A vision of corporate responsibility that left several board members visibly uncomfortable. This represents a significant departure from our profit-centered approach, objected Vernon Matthews, the oldest board member. It represents evolution, Della countered, sustainable profit through ethical innovation. Their united front left no room for traditional objections. By meeting's end, even the most resistant directors had conceded to their shared vision. Leaving the boardroom, Langston's phone chimed with an alert that made him pause. Singapore authorities report Kingsley's been released on bail. Della's expression darkened. How? The evidence apparently came into question. Langston showed her the notification. Key witnesses suddenly recanted. He's not finished with us, she said quietly. No, Langston agreed, but neither are we finished with him. That evening, as they prepared for the Truman Foundation Gala, their first public appearance since the wedding, an unexpected delivery arrived at their penthouse. The elegant box contained a single black rose and card bearing 2 words, "Not over." Security teams swept the building while Della studied the threat with analytical calm. He's desperate, dangerous. And predictable, Langston added, reviewing security protocols on his tablet. He'll want to make a statement tonight at the gala. Then we'll be ready. The Metropolitan Museum transformed for the annual gala, New York's elite gathering amid artistic splendor to support Truman Foundation initiatives. As Langston and Della made their entrance, whispers rippled through the crowd. His visible injuries and their united front contradicted rumors of marital discord. "Quite the performance," came a British-accented voice from behind them. They turned to find Archer Kingsley, immaculate in evening wear, champagne flute in hand. His smile never reached his cold eyes. "Bold move, attending our event," Langston remarked, positioning himself slightly before Della. "Your event?" Archer's laugh carried a brittle edge. "I'm a platinum donor this year. Didn't you see the guest list?" Della's hand squeezed Langston's in warning, a silent reminder to maintain composure in public. "Enjoy the champagne," she replied coolly. "I hear criminal defendants should savor luxuries while they can." Anger flashed across Archer's features before his mask of civility returned. "We'll see who faces consequences, Della." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Langston. "Some partnerships are more fragile than they appear, especially those built on convenience rather than truth." As he moved away, Langston turned to Della. What did he mean by that? Before she could respond, Langston's security chief approached urgently. "Sir, we've detected unauthorized access to the Foundation's servers. Someone's attempting to broadcast to the gala screens." "Block it," Langston ordered. "Too late," the chief replied, as the museum's display screens flickered to life. The elegant presentation about Foundation achievements disappeared, replaced by surveillance photos. Della meeting with Archer in Lagos 2 years earlier, followed by documents bearing both their signatures. The final image showed transaction records with highlighted transfers from ETG to Miles Communications. The fabricated evidence painted a damning picture of collusion and betrayal. As gasps echoed through the stunned crowd, Della's eyes met Langston's, finding not accusation but resolve. Without words, understanding passed between them. Archer's final play was unfolding, and they would face it together. "Get me a microphone," Langston demanded, never breaking Della's gaze. "It's time to end this." As security located Archer attempting to leave through a service exit, Langston took the stage, Della at his side. The crowd fell silent, anticipating scandal or denial. Instead, they witnessed something extraordinary. 2 people standing together against manipulation, choosing truth over self-protection. "It seems we have an uninvited narrator tonight," Langston began, his voice carrying authority despite his recent injuries. "One who believes relationships can be destroyed as easily as they can be fabricated." The trap was sprung. All that remained was to see who would be caught in its jaws. Chapter 12. The Redemption. Silence gripped the Metropolitan Museum's grand hall as Langston stood at the podium, Della beside him. The fabricated images still flickered across screens, casting accusations into the rarefied air. New York's elite held their collective breath, scenting scandal with predatory anticipation. "2 months ago, I married Della Miles," Langston began, his voice carrying strength despite recent injuries. "The world saw a business merger disguised as matrimony. They weren't entirely wrong." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Della's hand found his, their fingers intertwining visibly before hundreds of witnesses. "What began as a contract has become the most profound partnership of my life," he continued. "And that transformation terrifies the man responsible for tonight's theatrics." Security discreetly surrounded Archer near the service exit, preventing his escape while keeping the confrontation from disrupting Langston's address. Archer Kingsley orchestrated not only this evening's display, but the original rumors that poisoned our wedding night. Langston's gaze found Archer across the room. The same man who arranged my kidnapping in Singapore when corporate espionage failed. Gasps echoed through the hall as photographer flashes captured Archer's furious expression. "The evidence you're seeing is fabricated," Della spoke for the first time, her voice clear and confident. "Created by a man whose obsession turned to vengeance when rejected. The same man who spread lies about my past that my husband once believed." Langston faced her fully, the crowd momentarily forgotten. "My greatest mistake, one I'll spend a lifetime making right." The raw honesty in his voice silenced even the most cynical onlookers. This wasn't performance or damage control. It was genuine vulnerability from Manhattan's most notorious power broker. "Mr. Kingsley believes relationships built on pragmatism cannot withstand assault." Langston addressed the audience again. "He's wrong. What begins as arrangement can transform into something unbreakable when tested by fire." Archer broke free from security's loose perimeter, striding toward the stage. "Enough pretty speeches," he snarled, desperation evident in his unraveling composure. "Tell them about Lagos, Della. About the encryption keys you promised ETG before your convenient marriage." "There were no promises," she replied calmly. "No betrayal, only your delusion." "I can destroy you both," Archer threatened, reaching inside his jacket. Security moved instantly, but not before he produced a small device, thumb hovering over its trigger. "Quantum encryption isn't your only Singapore project, is it, Langston? Shall I broadcast the defense contract details instead?" The threat of revealing classified information froze security momentarily, exactly as Archer had calculated. He grabbed Della's arm, pulling her toward him as he backed toward a side exit. "We're leaving," he hissed. "Together, as it should have been before Truman interfered." Langston stepped forward despite security's restraining hands. "This ends now, Kingsley. Stay back." Archer's composure shattered completely. "One step and I release everything, the defense contracts, offshore accounts, all of it." What happened next unfolded with cinematic precision. Della, seemingly compliant in Archer's grip, made a subtle movement, her stiletto heel driving into his instep with surgical accuracy. As he reflexively loosened his hold, she executed a perfect defensive maneuver, twisting free while simultaneously securing the device from his hand. "Self-defense training," she explained to his shocked expression. "Another Lagos project you didn't bother to learn about." Security swarmed Archer, restraining him properly this time. As they escorted him out, his desperate gaze remained fixed on Della. "We could have built something extraordinary together." "I already have," she replied simply, returning to Langston's side. The crowd erupted in conversation as federal agents appeared, taking custody of both Archer and his device. Rumors would circulate for months about classified projects and corporate espionage, but the image that dominated news cycles was simpler, more powerful. Langston and Della Truman, hands joined, facing chaos together. Later that night, in the quiet sanctuary of their penthouse, they stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Manhattan glitter below. The facade of perfect union had been shattered, replaced by something genuine, complex, imperfect, real. "I never thanked you," Della said softly. "For what?" "For believing me tonight. For not doubting when those images appeared." Langston turned to her, gentle fingers tracing her cheek. "I learned my lesson the first time. Doubt is easier than trust, control simpler than vulnerability. I chose wrong before. Never again." She leaned into his touch. "We started backwards, didn't we? Marriage first, understanding later, trust after that. And love at the end," he finished, the word no longer foreign between them. "Not the end," Della corrected, taking his hand and placing it over her abdomen. "The beginning." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're 6 weeks." Her smile held both certainty and vulnerability. Since the hurricane. Not precisely planned, but... She couldn't finish as Langston gathered her carefully in his arms, mindful of both her news and his healing injuries. His kiss held reverence, joy, and promises that required no contractual language. When they separated, his eyes shimmered with uncharacteristic emotion. I never imagined wanting this. Family, connection, purpose beyond power. Neither did I, she admitted. My mother used to say, true partnerships aren't found, they're built. Choice by choice, day by day. Wise woman, Langston murmured, his hands cradling her face. I choose you, Della Truman, today and every day forward. And I choose you. Her voice held the strength and certainty that had first captivated him. Not for business advantage or social status, but for the man revealed beneath the armor. 6 months later, they stood together at another podium, this one overlooking the newly constructed Miles Truman Communication Center in Lagos. Solar panels glinted on its innovative design, while local children gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. This center represents our shared vision, Della addressed the assembled crowd, her pregnancy now visibly advanced. Connectivity that serves humanity rather than merely generating profit. Langston's hand rested protectively at the small of her back as he added, and proof that the most powerful mergers transcend business to transform lives. The corporate world had watched their evolution with fascination, power brokers becoming philanthropists, competitors becoming collaborators in their model. What began as headlines about Manhattan's most calculated marriage had become a case study in corporate responsibility and personal redemption. That evening, as African sunset painted their suite in amber hues, Langston held Della close, her head resting against his chest, their child moving between them. Hurricane season begins next month, she murmured sleepily. He acknowledged, fingers tracing patterns along her spine. Should we return to the lake house for anniversary symmetry? She laughed softly. You want to celebrate our anniversary in a place where you once slept on the sofa? I want to celebrate in the place where I finally understood what matters. His voice grew serious. Where I began to see past arrangement to possibility, Della shifted to meet his gaze. From shattered vows to unbreakable ones. Precisely. Langston's hand settled over their growing child. Though I'd prefer a less eventful storm this time. The universe doesn't grant such requests, she teased, eyes shining with contentment. But with the right partner, any storm becomes navigable. As night descended over Lagos, they remained entwined. Two people who had begun as strategic allies and discovered something far more valuable than all their combined empires. Partnership that transformed wounds into wisdom, suspicion into strength, and arranged marriage into abiding love. What had shattered had been reforged, stronger at the broken places, unbreakable at last.